Eric Freeman Sims, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. I am really excited because this is the season finale for season 2 of Coffee and Words.
Awesome. Congratulations on getting through
Yeah,
season 2.
I know. It blows my mind that it's already happening. But yeah, I've got my mood lighting going on here because this is going to be the Coffee and Words haunted show. So
Yeah.
I have brought you on for all things spooky, scary, creepy, and I'm excited. Yes, and you have the Bigfoot mug,
The Sasquatch.
coffee. And for all those who are disappointed when I have water on the show sometimes, this is black coffee. So for our dark show today, I've got real coffee and there is nothing in this coffee. So I don't know, might have a psychotic episode in a minute. We'll see.
I am not a coffee person, so I actually have root beer.
Nice, nice. Hey, root beer is great. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Tell me what a paranormal researcher is, what a paranormal researcher does, because that is your job. You are a paranormal researcher.
Yeah, paranormal researcher and investigator. So the biggest thing is I kind of digest everything paranormal that I can, including going out to different haunted locations and investigating. And that's part of the research too. A huge part of the research is especially into the history behind locations, because the history is important to understand why it's haunted to begin with, because you want to know, okay, well, why is this particular spirit there, or possibly this spirit there? So I dive into lots of history. So it just kind of both goes hand in hand, but also learning about all the different phenomena, different theories behind the paranormal, because nobody's an expert in this field. It's, we're all trying to learn and trying to further the field by doing research and doing experiments. So whenever I go to a location to investigate, I'm always trying to think outside the box and do different things to communicate these spirits and get information from them.
It's a lot of work. I think it's probably more detailed than people realize.
Yeah, it is. And TV makes it look very quick and interesting for the most part. They narrow it down like a 3 or 4 day investigation into 45 minutes, and they just show you the highlights. For the most part, we're really just sitting in the dark talking to things that aren't there. So, it's but you can't put that on TV because that's not entertaining. People don't want to see that side of the paranormal investigating. They want to see, okay, well, we caught the shadow, or we caught this voice, or those type of things, because that's what makes good TV and entertainment. But the paranormal is, it's long hours of sitting in the dark investigating, trying to get something to call in a response, or something to activate your equipment, or capture an EVP or something like that. And knowing the history, a lot of the research part comes in knowing the history, because you need to know what questions to ask to get the type of responses that you're looking for, and to help further the history of the place. I've even seen that many, many times where you've actually gotten answers to questions that they didn't know. And so that's pretty interesting to get validating the history that was kind of maybe not known if it was true or not. And then you get the direct response from the actual person who just now is in a different form.
That is cool. That's fascinating. That's absolutely fascinating. Well, tell me about your podcast, because you've taken your love of all of this and your expertise in all of this, and you have turned it into a podcast for people to listen to.
Yeah, the Unseen Paranormal Podcast. And actually, I've only got about 10 more episodes until my season 2 finale.
Nice. We should celebrate together. That's awesome.
Yeah. So when I hit 100 episodes, that will be season 2 will be done. I did 50 for season 1, so 50 for season 2. But I've been doing it for almost 2 years now, and it's just grown and grown and grown. But I talk to authors, researchers, other researchers, and other investigators and historians. I talk to pair of celebrities from TV that people would recognize, just to try to figure out what the paranormal is, and to get their opinion and their views on different stuff in the paranormal world. And it also changes my views. I know over the 90 episodes that I've done, my views have definitely changed from hearing other people's experiences and other theories that made sense. And I'm also open to that, and also talking, like I said, historians as well, talking about the history behind these places. And like I said before, it's very important to understand the history to understand why there's a haunting to begin with. And so you kind of have to be into the history to be a serious researcher and investigator. But yeah, the show is just taken off, and I love talking to these people. is so much fun. And it's to me, it's surreal because now I'm talking to these people I've seen on TV for so many years. And I don't really get starstruck. I've never been one of those people, but I'm just in awe of where my life is now versus 2 years ago. I had a very surreal moment the other day. I talked to Katrina Weidman, who Katrina was on a show called Paranormal State. She was on Paranormal Lockdown with Nick Groff, and now she's on Portals of Hell with Jack Osborne. And she's been huge in paranormal TV. And so that episode is coming out in a couple of days from us recording here. But yeah, just talking to her, I just had a moment when I was talking to her the other day, like, I never thought 2 years ago that this would be my life now, and this is what I would do for a living. And so, yeah, it's just crazy. And the show, it's so much fun. Like I said, I have a guest every week and we just have a conversation. I try not to do any kind of structured questions. I do my research on my guest, a lot of it, including reading books that they may put out and things like that. So it's a lot of time goes into every episode to make sure that I can put out the best quality possible. And then also I'm trying to ask questions that some of these people have never had in an interview before, because some of them have done thousands of interviews, whether it be on TV or through other podcasts or radio. So I want them to come on my show and have a different experience and a different time than they would on another show, just to kind of set myself apart.
Yeah, definitely. And this is something very different from what I normally do on the show. And so for the season finale, I really wanted to just do something interesting and cool and different, just kind of change it up a little bit. But this is something that I think no matter where anyone is on the spectrum, we can all take something from this show. But what do you say to people who just don't believe in it, or they think it's silly, or they've never had an experience? Because sometimes I'm afraid to tell people, hey, I've had some weird experiences, because I know their reaction. I'm going to get the eye roll, or I'm going to get the, okay, whatever, Sarah,
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that people who don't believe in it haven't had an experience. And I think that's the problem. And we're all different. And the kind of going theory in the paranormal right now is that we all vibrate on a slightly different frequency. And so that's why some people have paranormal experiences and some people don't. That's why some people see shadow figures or full body apparitions, and other people just hear noises and voices and things like that. So it just depends on what frequency you're vibrating on. And that kind of crosses over to the way physics and science is going now too, with the string theory and the multi dimensions and that type stuff. So to me, that kind of
quantum physics geek. I geek out over quantum physics and quantum mechanics. So yeah.
Yeah. And I just love when you can actually tie hardcore science, to the paranormal, because the paranormal is not anything we can prove yet. And that's what we're working towards. But the fact that everything is on a spectrum and a wave, and even light, sound, it's all vibrations and it's all waves. And so it would only make sense that we are vibrating on a certain frequency, and each person is slightly different. And so that's why some people have more paranormal experiences than others. I think it also comes down to being taught out of it when you're a kid, because I think we all have this inherent like intuition and empathy that we can feel other people's energy and we can tune into that. But I think if you come from a family of parents, especially parents, because they have the most influence on small kids, when kids come to them and say, I have an imaginary friend, or this happened to me, and the parents kind of just dismiss it because it may scare the parents. They don't want to admit that something paranormal is going on or their house is haunted. So I think that shuts down that part of the kid, because they're taught out of it. And so I think a lot of people go through that because like I said, it scares their parents or whatever. I was lucky to grow up in a family that kind of fostered it, because a lot of my family had lived in haunted houses and had experiences when they were kids and grown up. And so it was something that was talked about and wasn't shunned in my house. And so I've talked to other people who didn't have like a spiritual awakening until they were adults, because they were taught out of it, and they were told, no, you're not seeing anything, you're not hearing anything, go to sleep, whatever, when they really were having experiences. And so they kind of shut down with it until they got older, into their 20s or whatever, and got more into it. And the paranormal is one of those things. If you talk to anybody who is knee deep in the paranormal like I am, the more you look into the paranormal, the more it looks into you. And so, especially when you're going to seek those experiences out. But yeah, I think a lot of people are just skeptical because they never had anything happen. One of the big things when I do like the Fairview Arts Council stuff, I've had this when I've done Fairview Arts Council events, Other events, many other events I've done, always get this, even public ghost hunts that I do that people buy a ticket and come to, they will come up to me and they'll say, I don't believe in ghosts, but here's my ghost story. So I
Okay.
find that interesting too. Well, if you don't believe in them, but here's your ghost story, because they want my opinion if it was something that was really paranormal, because they can't explain it. So I think a lot of people also, they don't want to believe it themselves. So they will continue to say they're skeptical and they'll stay skeptical when actually they have their own experiences and they just want to ignore them, which is fine. We as humans tend to put things in boxes. And if something doesn't fit in our box, in our world, then we can't really deal with it. And we get into this thing called cognitive dissonance, where we will argue our point, even when people bring facts to us that are verifiable and you can show somebody, they will still deny.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's called cognitive dissonance. And it's a crazy thing, because people, they can have all these experiences, but if they don't want it to be part of their world, then they'll just keep denying it. It's interesting.
Yeah. And for people who are religious, who believe that we are souls inside of a body, it would make sense for those who are skeptical. It would make sense that if we are spirit beings, we are on some level, maybe sometimes more than others, connected to that spirit realm.
Yeah.
To me, that makes sense. So there's a lot of different skeptics out there, but I'm open-minded, always have been, always teachable and willing to learn,
Yeah.
what's out there. But yeah, it's definitely, and I think some people just get scared. And I've got a friend who said she may not watch this episode because it scares her so much. So, but what is the creepiest story that you've ever heard?
Oh, I've had so much stuff happen to myself, and I've heard so many other creepy stories. One of the guests that I had on, that was my season 1 finale, actually did a 2-part episode, because me and her talked for 2.5 hours, and she had some really crazy stories. And anybody that's fans of the Conjuring movies, you should know this lady, because she actually lived in the real Conjuring house, and her family was the subject of the first Conjuring movie, and they used their real names, and she was a consultant on the film. But the film is only about 5% true, and that's kind of what we talked about when I talked to her. But some of the stories that of things that happened to her family in that house that are true and she wrote about, are scarier than they could have probably ever put in a movie, because people just would have probably walked out of the theater, like they did back in the 70s with The Exorcist. Her little sister, man, got tortured. Her little sister Cindy was the youngest out of the 5 girls, and she got levitated and thrown up against the wall, and like crazy stuff like you saw in The Exorcist, but this really happened. And also one time, her and her mother were in the sitting room, living room area of the actual Conjuring house, and all of a sudden, she said they just appeared right in front of them, was this man and his family sitting down to dinner, but they looked like they were from like the 1700s, which that house is built in the 1700s. And she said the man looked over at another man sitting at the table and said, "Huh, do you see this?" And they were looking back at Andrea and her mom. And so the question was that a time slip? So that Andrea and her mom were ghosts to those people, and those people were ghosts to her and her mom. I
Wow.
find that crazy fascinating and kind of scary to think about, that we can slip into this other time stream, because then you get into the missing 411 stuff with people going missing in the national parks and these clusters, and that be one of the explanations. But one of the creepiest things that ever happened to me was probably getting touched at a location. Um,
Hmm.
we were investigating this place in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and I won't say where the place is because it was a private investigation, but it was not. It was a government building. I'll just say that. And we were in this area upstairs, and I was sitting about 2 feet from the wall, and I was holding a camcorder, and I was the only one that could see, because I had a night vision camcorder on everybody else. And we're doing EVP sessions, all that, and I'm recording all of it. And I get what feels like a finger run up the back of my head. And I'm like sitting there like, did that really just happen? And so I hollered for the other investigators and like, turn your flashlight on and come over here, see if that's a bug crawling at me, because that's kind of what it felt like. Well, come to find out, the next day, we got a witness got a hold of us, and he said that had happened to a friend of his there twice, and in that same area. And we didn't know about that the first time. And then the second time we went back to investigate again, it happened to me again. And I was sitting in a different area, but I wasn't close to the wall or anything. That's an interesting experience to get touched. That'll kind of creep you out. The fact that they can reach out and touch you. It's one thing to get EVPs and voices and knocks, and even to see full body apparition or things like that. But to get touched is a little more creepy to me.
Yeah, I've had instances where it felt like maybe something had touched me, but you never know if it's nerves and we've talked about this before. Anything that happens, I'm going to look for the scientific explanation, something to explain it away, something logical, right. Something, okay, oh, there was a draft. Oh, this, I'm going to look for that first. I'm not someone who jumps to, the paranormal, because I want to make sure. But when there are those things that you absolutely cannot explain away, it's like, okay, that just happened. I don't know what that was, but there is nothing solid I can explain what just happened. You mentioned The Conjuring. So that's a great segue to talk about film and television versus reality. We have a lot of based on actual events, things that come out. We have a lot of, or movies and TV shows that just will portray the paranormal or hauntings. And some of them are very entertaining, but what would be sort of the differences from what we see, in movies and what actually happens?
Yeah, there are a lot of movies out there that are based on a true story. Well, one example, I was actually talking about this earlier today. One example that I use is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That the original film, it says is based on a true story. Well, they're playing with the words there, because the person that it was based on, and I know this is not a paranormal movie or whatever, but the person that it was based on was Ed Gein. Well, Ed Gein didn't go around wearing a mask, chasing people with a chainsaw. Yeah, he was a serial killer, and yeah, he did some really crazy things with digging up bodies and killing people and skinning them and things like that. So it's the same with paranormal movies. Like The Exorcist was loosely based on a real case. I think it was 1949 exorcism of a boy that they called Roland Doe, because he didn't want his real name. His family didn't want his real name used. And actually, I had Troy Taylor, the author of the book about it, and it actually happened in St. Louis. And he's kind of the expert on that case. Well, William J. Blatty, who wrote the Exorcist book that the movie came from, actually was in seminary school when the Catholic Church was doing the exorcisms on this 14-year-old boy in St. Louis in 1949. And so that's where he got the idea. He heard about it from the older priests who were actually doing the exorcism.
Wow.
And so that's William Peter Blatty. That's when he wrote The Exorcist based on that. And so they're loosely based. The Exorcist kind of really did happen. The whole pea soup head spin around thing didn't happen. But there were some crazy things that happened to this 14-year-old boy that nobody could explain. And there were lots of witnesses to that levitation and all this other crazy stuff that happened around this boy. And also the weird thing is he never had any mental health issues, none of that. The gentleman who was Roland Doe, and I forget his real name because he just passed away a couple of years ago, and Troy Taylor, the author, told him, I will not put your real name out there until you've passed away. But he actually became a NASA engineer and lived a normal life, even though he had this exorcism when he was 14 and all this crazy stuff happened to him. Even down to something talking about The Exorcist, Discovery Plus did what they call a shock doc on that case, the real exorcism, the real exorcist. And even in that, being a documentary from Discovery Channel, some of the facts in there were completely wrong. Some of the things that they say in there never happened. And so even with documentaries that are supposed to be all true, you got to kind of, especially in the paranormal, you got to kind of watch, what you believe and what you see, because they still have an agenda, because it's still entertainment. And so they still want to entertain you. So even if a story's not real, they're going to put some fantastical story in there. And it even comes down to the paranormal reality shows. One of the big ones that I rail against, and I know a lot of people in the paranormal do, is Ghost Adventures. And when I started doing my podcast, I started hearing from people from some of these locations that Ghost Adventures have been to. And I was told that Ghost Adventures comes in with a script. If you're a paranormal investigator and this is a reality show, why do you have a script that you already know what's going to happen? You've never even been to the location. And one author that I talked to, that she's also a paranormal investigator at a location here in Tennessee that they came to. She said when she corrected them on their history, they told her to mind her own business, basically. So they even got the history about the place wrong, but it did, but they come in with a script. So you have to look at a lot of those shows as entertainment and kind of take them at face value. There are a few investigators that I on TV that I think are really the real deal, and I don't really think they fake anything or anything like that. Katrina Weedman, like I was talking about from Portals of Hell, she's one of them. Is kind of a no nonsense investigator and just person in general, and I wouldn't see her faking anything. The shows that she's been on, the 3 shows she's been on, they've been pretty reputable. But there are shows out there. There's some other ones for like cryptids, like I think it's Mountain Monsters. It's like a bunch of hillbillies, like your stereotypical hillbillies in like overalls and straw hat with big long beards, running around the hills of West Virginia and the Appalachian Mountains with their shotguns and dogs looking for Bigfoot, and they jump at every little noise, And then you have like Ghost Brothers, which are these 3 dudes that they jump and scream and run at any little noise in the dark. And, some of the stuff is just ridiculous. So most of the paranormal TV, I would say I'm skeptical anyway. I call myself a skeptical believer. So when I'm out investigating, I try to disprove anything that I can. And even in my own house is haunted. But if I can disprove it, then I'm going to disprove it. It's not some paranormal if there's a logical explanation for it. And so I typically am not. That. Yeah. Well, you kind of, to be a serious investigator and researcher in something that you can't prove, you kind of have to be skeptical. If you want people to respect you and to respect, what you had to say and all of that. Now, I would never go as far as to discount anybody's experiences they've ever had in the paranormal, because I don't know, I wasn't there.
Right.
Because I don't want anybody discounting mine, because I've had personal experiences that I can't prove happened. I can tell you the story, but I can't prove it. But at the same time, I'm going to be skeptical until I see it myself. And one of my big mantras, and I don't remember where I first got this, but it's become one of my big mantras about investigating, is when we go into a place to investigate, we don't go there to investigate the haunting. We go there to investigate stories of haunting. Because when you go into a location, you get into, it might just be noisy pipes in the wall. You can have high EMF, which can affect, high EMF fields can actually cause you to see and hear things, have hallucinations. So we go in, I go in with a skeptical mind. Okay, prove it to me. The location, not the people, but the location needs to prove it to me. If it's haunted, then we're going to capture, or I'm going to have experiences that are going to prove that. But you kind of have to go into the TV shows with that same idea. And movies. The Blair Witch was a huge one back a long time ago that people thought was real because that's how they portrayed it. And it was the first one of those found footage movies. And people thought it really happened because they had this whole website with all these police files and it looked real. No, that's just Hollywood marketing. And it's the same with the Travel Channel, same with Discovery Channel. Like I said, some of the shows I do believe for the most part are true, and I don't think they're faking stuff. Do they dramatize it for TV? Yeah, because if they didn't, it wouldn't be entertaining. And they wouldn't get the ratings or everything. So they have to get viewers to watch it. If you like watching Ghost Adventures, by all means watch Ghost Adventures. But just know that it's entertainment. Right. It's not real. For the most part, what they do is not real. And I guarantee you, Zach Baggins is not getting possessed by a demon every episode.
Yeah. Oh, gotta love Zach.
Yeah.
Good old Zach.
My advice to people would be, if you're interested in the real paranormal stuff, like I said, watch the shows. I still watch them, even though I'm skeptical of pretty much all of them on some level. Go out. There's plenty of events around Tennessee, around the whole country, that you can go to these public ghost hunt events for $25, $30, $40 and see what real investigators do and what real investigation is. And yeah, that's not exactly, if you would go with a team, it's not, but it's a good, like, short 3-4 hour slice of what, kind of condense what we do. And just go out and experience it. It's not scary. I promise you, it is not scary. I've never had anybody get scared and leave on any event I've ever done. Most people leave and say, I had a lot of fun, and it's a lot different than what I saw on TV and what I expected, because they see the jump scares and that stuff, even on paranormal reality TV, when that really doesn't happen. I mean, when you're asking for something to knock on a wall and it happens, why would it scare you? You just ask for it, you know? So if you're doing an EVP session and we play the audio back and you hear an EVP, why would that scare you? Well, you just ask for that to happen. And so most people, like I said, I've done plenty of events over the past few years and never had anybody get scared, but I've heard people be like, well, I would come, but I think I would just be too scared. And no, it's not like that at all. It's very laid back and we have a lot of fun. But yeah, when it comes to, just take everything with a grain of salt. If you can't prove it to yourself, just understand that TV and movies are entertainment. I don't care if they say they're based on a true story. And with Google and the internet now, you can go find the real information for yourself. It's more about the history and learning about the place than if I ever get paranormal activity in a place. The stories and the folklore is just as important as if I caught a full body apparition on camera or in a picture, or, you know, or a class A EVP of it telling me its name, you know. The journey is probably 90% of it. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I love going out to a haunted location in the dark and sitting there and trying to capture stuff, because it's exciting when you do capture something, or you hear footsteps or a noise that, you know, a door opens or closes, things like that. It's exciting because you're getting to interact with this history. And so that's what you have to, in the paranormal world, you kind of have two different types of people. You have what I refer to as ghost hunters, which are the thrill seekers. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you want to do, to go out to these events, you want to go investigate and be a thrill seeker, then be that. Just don't portray yourself as a serious investigator and put yourself out there to help people. Right. Leave that to us, experienced people. If somebody, you know, wants to call somebody and say, hey, I need help because my house is haunted. If you're a thrill seeking ghost hunter, please send them to somebody who knows what they're doing. But
not Zach.
Yeah, no. You'll end up with a demon in your house if you call Zach Baggins.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the paranormal world's for everybody, because I think we all have experienced it, whether we want to admit it or not. And it doesn't matter. I mean, the paranormal doesn't, my forte is ghost. That's just always been my thing. That's always been what I've been really interested in, and as an investigator. But, you know, it encompasses Bigfoot and cryptids like Loch Ness Monster and things like that, the Wendigo, the Mothman, and then you have the UFO part of the camp. And so the paranormal encompasses a lot. I don't personally go out and hunt for Bigfoot because I'm not trying to die in the woods, and also I don't camp. So I'm just not a camper. I'm not that type of person. But you know, there are plenty of people that go out and do that. And I've talked to plenty of those people on my show too. And I think there's some credibility in Bigfoot and UFOs, especially with the government UAP stuff. But yeah, it's just interesting stories and folklore that's been handed down. And this tradition of storytelling of folklore, I think, kind of gets lost sometimes, especially with the internet nowadays. You know, people aren't reading as much and things like that. So I think the paranormal keeps that alive. And that's an old tradition, you know, that goes back so many years. And like even in the Victorian times, in the Victorian era, back in the late 1800s, Christmas was the most paranormal holiday of all. It wasn't even Halloween for them, because they sat around the fire on Christmas Eve and told ghost stories in Victorian times. That's how much into the dead they were and like the spiritual stuff.
Yeah. Seances were huge in the late 1800s.
Yeah. So it's just a whole intriguing world. And my big thing is I'm not trying to prove anything to anybody. Because the biggest thing I'll tell you is I don't know, because I can't prove it to you. I can't prove it to myself. I can only prove to myself the things I've seen that I can explain. But I think, yeah, just be open-minded and put yourself out there to maybe experience something by going to one of these events, or, you know, talking to different investigators and people and hearing stories. And I have some EVPs to play too. You had asked me to.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. We're going to get to that. I'm excited. Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head that regardless of where you stand with paranormal, I mean, the main reason to look into it is the stories, the history, the people. And that's what fascinates me most, is learning the history of a place. And through, you know, stories of hauntings, you're going to learn about people who really did live, whether you believe that they're haunting an area or not. You're going to learn about people.
I don't really make any money off the events. It all goes to the historical location I'm doing the event at. So that's another byproduct of having people come in. It helps them keep their doors open. and also teach more people about the history of this place that you might not have known about, especially right in your own backyard. And it just gives a different view of the history. But like I said, that's a paranormal tourism is, man, especially during COVID, paranormal tourism kept a lot of these historical places open because they were renting them out to paranormal teams. Because with social distancing and that type of stuff, you only have 3 or 4 people in most paranormal teams, and they're going into this house at night when nobody else is around. And so it was the perfect thing for the COVID lockdown restrictions, because they would pay, $5, $6, $7, $800 for one night in this haunted place. And that helped these places survive during COVID over the 2 years that they had to be closed or have restrictions and that type of stuff. So yeah, it's the paranormal world is a lot bigger than a lot of people realize too, with stuff like that. And I've met so many great people that do events just to give back. And that's kind of what I've tried to do myself when I do these live events and sell tickets. It's not about making money for me. It's about teaching people about this history through the paranormal, because I get their interest through the paranormal. I'm going ghost hunting, I'm going investigating. And then they learn all this history and these fascinating stories about these locations that they never would have known. And so I think that gets them, a lot of times it gets a lot of people more fired up, because they're like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned the Mothman, that's something I haven't thought about in a while, but what a fascinating case study.
Yeah.
That I don't know that we'll ever have any explanation for that.
Yeah, it's a really in-depth story, and there's a whole lot more. The Mothman Prophecy movie that you're talking about, it kind of is confusing a bit if you're not familiar with the story. It makes more sense if you go and look at it yourself, or even read the book the Mothman Prophecy came from. But it has alien visitation around the same time the Mothman and before the bridge collapsed. But the biggest thing is that the Mothman showed up as kind of a harbinger of death and destruction, because then the bridge that went over, I believe it's the Ohio River between West Virginia and Ohio, and it collapsed and killed like 40 something people during rush hour. And there's video footage and stuff of it collapsing. And yeah, it's just a crazy story. But there was this like man who showed up around the same time who claimed to be an alien. And now people are they're still debating in that alien community if he really was. And, and now here lately, I've seen things about the Chicago Mothman, that a similar creature has shown up in Chicago around the Chicago O'Hare Airport. And I saw a guy wrote a whole book about it, that there's enough sightings and things for them to write a whole book about it.
Wow. I bet the Reddit threads on this are fascinating in and of themselves. We should all take a night and go through the Reddit.
Yeah, Mothman is starting to become like the Loch Ness Monster. That there's only been a handful of sightings of the Loch Ness Monster throughout the years.
Yeah.
But this myth and this legend continues, and that's how Mothman is. But yeah, it's an amazing story around that little town, and that area of the country is kind of weird anyway. Between that area of, there's kind of a triangle there, and I forget what they call it, but between Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky, that's like they call it an area of high strangeness. And it's just, there's so many weird stuff. If anybody's familiar with like Hellier, which was a documentary series, and there's a podcast called Pennyroyal that's about that part of Kentucky, and Hellier's about Hellier, Kentucky. But just the weird things that go on in that part of the country is just strange. It's kind of like, have you ever heard of Skinwalker Ranch out in Utah?
Yes, I've heard of that.
That's kind of how Hellier, Kentucky, and like that, where the Mothman was in Ohio and West Virginia, and that area is kind of a lot of the same phenomena. It's just, there's more paranormal activity there for some reason than other places in the country, kind of like Skinwalker Ranch. I've been doing a research for a book that I'm writing. It's a true nonfiction paranormal book called Small Town Haunts and Legends of Tennessee. So I wanted to go to all these small towns and get these local legends and local folklore and ghost stories about these different locations and the history about these things you would never heard of, because people have heard of, Graceland and Ryman and all those places being haunted, like the famous places around Tennessee, like the Bijou Theater in Knoxville. And so all these bigger cities, a lot more people know the ghost stories, but these smaller towns around Tennessee, they don't. And so a lot of I'm doing West Tennessee. The book will be West Tennessee, the Middle Tennessee, and then East Tennessee. But I've done a lot of research out in Appalachia, and yeah, there's so many stories with the Native American folklore. Gatlinburg, man, what a haunted history that place has. So many ghost stories. There's a motel there where a girl this really happened. She was really murdered by a man in this motel room, and people see nothing but a pair of legs running across the parking lot in Gatlinburg. Yeah. Just a pair of legs running across the parking lot. And there's another one, another hotel in Gatlinburg where a 3-year-old fell off the balcony and died, and they see this little girl ghost around this hotel. But yeah, there's so much haunted stuff. And then you have, I mean, the Smoky Mountain National Park is the most visited national park in the country.
Really?
And so yeah, they get like 12 million visitors a year. That's more than any other national park.
I had no idea.
Yeah, even during COVID, they still got like 10 million visitors. But also Gatlinburg is the wedding capital of the United States.
I believe that. Yeah.
Well, you would think Las Vegas, but no, it's Gatlinburg. But yeah, that whole area. I mean, you got weird disappearances out there in West Tennessee. One of them that's really fascinating is the Dennis Martin case that happened back in the 70s. That he just went missing. There was a family, so him and his family went camping, all the guys in their family, and Dennis Martin was like 3 or 4 years old, and him and his brother and 2 other kids that were with another family were playing hide and seek, and he went and hid behind a tree, and they never seen him again. Well, there was a family camping. There's a lot more to the story. It's an in-depth story. It's really interesting. But people that were hiking down, a family that was hiking further down the mountain, were looking for bears. And so they were looking across to the mountain across from them, and they saw like this hairy looking man with something red thrown over his shoulder. Well, Dennis Martin was wearing red when he disappeared. Yeah, so some people conjecture that was Bigfoot, kidnapped Dennis Martin or whatever, but they never found him. That was back in the 70s. But there's all kind of crazy stories like people disappearing out in the Smoky Mountains, and yeah, Appalachia is just full of those. But like Spearfinger, you have the Tennessee Wild Man, which is similar to Bigfoot but smaller and more man looking. That there are even news reports from the 1800s that were serious news reports saying women stay inside after dark because the wild man will come and snatch you up out of the middle of the street in the town. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So if you could investigate any place in the world, where would it be?
I think my answer is the same as a lot of other investigators. I think it would be the White House.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because there's lots of stories that come out of there. Like Abraham Lincoln's ghost has been seen quite a few times.
Mary Todd. Lincoln?
Mary Todd. Yeah, there's lots of things that go on in the White House that stories have kind of leaked out from aides and people that have worked at the White House over the years. I think that would be one of the ultimate ones, because I think also because it would be so hard to actually get in there and do it. That if you ever did get to, you'd probably be the only one. But that would definitely be probably the top of the list. Another place here locally in Franklin would be Carton Plantation. I have been in there. Well, I have been in there. I've snuck in there when I was a teenager, which I don't condone trespassing, but that was long before the ghost shows and stuff, and I didn't know any better. And I've had experiences there, but I would love to get in there and actually investigate now, with the technology we have and that type stuff.
There are 3 cases, 3 hauntings that have always, or for many years, fascinated me and that I've read a lot about. 2 of them that I have actually been to the locations and more than once. And so let's go through them really quick. I'll see if any information that you have, your experiences with these 3. I know you and I have talked about Amityville. That's a very famous one. That is one that everybody and anyone who likes horror films, of course, is familiar with the name Amityville, which the true story is a lot different. What would you like people to know about Amityville? What can you tell us about that one before we get into the other 2?
I think with Amityville, the most important thing to remember is that a family really was murdered and slaughtered there while they slept. Their oldest son, Ronald DeFeo, went in with a shotgun and killed them all. His mother, his father, and his siblings. And so that's the first and foremost thing you need to understand, that there were real people And this was recent. This is not like 1800s where it's, you know what I'm saying? This was back in the 1970s. And so I think people need to realize that first. And pretty much in the paranormal world, I think the Amityville horror whole story has kind of been widely discredited by lots of people in the paranormal field, as it was more of a money making thing for the family to write the book, to make a movie. You know, they made lots of money off of that. And not to say that the house wasn't haunted, because after a mass murder like that happens and all that trauma, then there's a famous picture from inside the house of a little boy peeking out of a doorway, and the picture has been verified that it wasn't, nothing was, because it was taken on real film, that nothing was done to the film or anything like that. And it really does look like one of the DeFeo children was killed. I think the youngest son that was killed. So I think there is a haunting there. Now, I think it was trumped up with, you know, blood running down the walls and all this other stuff that was in the book and the movie, and what some of the family members have claimed. Did they go through hell? Maybe a little bit. You know, I mean, especially if you don't know what's going on, and you just move in this house and like all these sounds and things, and doors are open and closing and things like that. But I just don't think it was to the extent that they claimed it was. There was never any hard proof or evidence, and some of the kids have even come out and said no. Yeah. And the people that live there now, the people that have lived there after them, have claimed that they haven't had any problems. And the people that bought it from that family, I think lived there for like 25 years until they just recently sold it a few years ago. And they stayed there for 25 years. So if there's this crazy demonic stuff going on, you figure, okay, well, why did it just affect this family? You know,
right?
That doesn't make any sense to me.
Maybe they brought it with them when they moved in. No.
Could have.
Maybe
people can be
haunted. Yeah.
Yeah, people can be haunted too.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, one of my favorites is Resurrection Mary in Chicago. Yeah. And I've been there at night. I didn't go in the cemetery in the gates, but we drove over there one night with a friend of ours who lives in Chicago, and we didn't see anything. But the stories behind that are really, really chilling. And so have you investigated that? But have you researched that? Have you looked into that at all?
I am familiar with it. I find it fascinating because there's many stories that are similar to this, kind of across not just the United States, but the world. You'll get these clusters of stories, kind of like Resurrection Mary, where you have and these have been in folklore for a long, long time. Like Resurrection Mary, for people that aren't familiar, Resurrection Mary is like a hitchhiker that if you pick her up, she disappears. It's kind of the gist of the story. I mean, there's lots more to it, but
Resurrection Cemetery and
the Resurrection Cemetery,
yeah.
And there are clusters of these stories with the hitchhikers. Even here close to where we're at in White Bluff, you have the White Bluff Screamer. Oh. That one of the legends of the White Bluff Screamer, if you drive by her, you'll see a lady in a white dress walking down the road. You drive by her, she'll scream at you and chase your car. So you get these different variations on this hitchhiker ghost all around the world. And I don't know that story. The first place I believe it pops up was like in the early 1900s from a cab driver. I think Resurrection Mary is where it first pops up in Chicago from a cab driver back in the 1920s, something like that. And it's continued right on to people having experiences to this day that they claim. I mean, but it's always, it's one of those stories that it's always, oh, my cousin's brother's uncle.
Yeah.
You know? And so there are lots of stories in the folklore of the United States, especially. One of them that I'm sure a lot of people have heard is the school bus that got hit by the train. If you park on the train tracks and put baby powder on the back of your car will somehow get pushed over and it'll have kids' handprints on it. You ever heard that story?
Wow.
Or some variation of it?
Yeah, it sounds familiar, but it sounds
park somewhere. Yeah, you park on the train tracks and somehow your car gets pushed across. There's lots of those stories. Everywhere claims that this was I think in San Antonio, there's a railroad tracks where they claim that story originated, but then there's a place here in Tennessee that claims it happens there too. And so you get all of these same type stories, especially like the woman in a white dress type stories like Resurrection Mary and like the White Bluff Screamer. And there's always different variations on these too.
I saved the best or my favorite one for last. And the McKenzie Poltergeist is a very fascinating case. Covenanters Prison is a section of graveyard cemetery in Greyfriars Kirk in Edinburgh. And there's a section that's open to the public. You can just roam around freely. And then there's a gated section where the Covenanters were actually jailed. That is kept locked. The public cannot go back there unless you're on a ghost tour. People have been bitten, scratched, had their cameras damaged. There's a whole lot of really interesting things. And I think you have to sign a waiver before you go on these tours because people have been physically harmed. And, so it's one of the most, I've heard it's one of the most researched or, and visited sites in the world for all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And even the history of George McKenzie is fascinating history. And in the part of the cemetery you're talking about, it's supposed to be all of his victims that he sent to death, basically. But yeah, there's all kind of crazy stuff with the poltergeist phenomena. Poltergeists in general tend not to be living spirits or anything that ever lived. For the most part, whenever I talk about poltergeist, the phenomena has been studied by parapsychologists a lot. And poltergeist just means noisy ghost in German. That's where the term comes from. It means noisy ghost. And so poltergeists are always moving things. That's noisy ghost. That's what closing doors, moving things, throwing objects. But they're not, by parapsychologists who have researched them, they're not thought to be your traditional spirit, as in a disembodied person. They're thought to be thought forms. So they're created by our own PK abilities, which is psychokinetic abilities. And typically the phenomena centers around teenage girls going through and teenage boys, but for the most part, teenage girls going through hormone changes, all these emotions, all this stuff. And they just kind of build this entity that ends up with its own consciousness almost. And it kind of just acts on its own. But it starts out
at all.
Yeah. But the theory is that it starts out as a psychokinetic manifestation, which is psychokinesis is moving things with your mind. And so, but the poltergeist phenomenon has been studied by lots of people, by science and by parapsychologists. And I find it interesting. So I find that interesting that it would be in this area of the cemetery, that it would be a poltergeist, which it very well could be a thought form, but that it would be an actual spirit, because like you're saying, all this scratching and hitting and throwing and, messing with electronics and stuff, but nobody's ever like really captured like EVP or, anything like that. It's the pictures are always like this white smoky mist and all this stuff. It's interesting that some locations, and I believe there's something going on there because there's been so many people that have had, like you're saying, now you got to sign a waiver because there's so many people and it happens so often. It's amazing how there are these certain places that things like this happen more than anywhere else. Like the poltergeist phenomenon, it's not a really prevalent phenomenon in the paranormal, even though a lot of people are, because the poltergeist movie and watching movies, they're familiar with it and the term, but it's really not something that happens all that often. And so to have it happen on a regular basis at this one spot, it intrigues me of like, what's so special about this one spot? Like the energy, the Earth's magnetic energy, or what makes it conducive to this one phenomenon more than anywhere else in that same cemetery? Even, it's just this main one area. Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
We have come to the performance segment of the show, and you're not going to sing for us, but what we're going to do is we're going to play some EVPs, or you're going to play some EVPs, and we're going to listen to this, and you're going to tell me a little bit about them. But first, tell us what an EVP is for anyone that's unfamiliar.
So an EVP is electronic voice phenomena. So that is whenever we use a voice recorder or your cell phone, you can use your cell phone too, we ask questions. And sometimes when we listen back, have a response on the recording that we didn't hear with our own ears. Sometimes you hear it with your own ears, which I have one in this case that I'm going to play for you too, that you hear it with your own ears and it's captured on the recording. Also, the weird thing about EVP, the electronic voice phenomenon, and the reason it's called phenomena is because sometimes we'll hear it with our own ears but there's not any recorders or cameras that pick it up. So it's really hit or miss. It's a weird phenomenon, and it's also, people call them disembodied voices. But yeah, the fact of capturing them is the electronic voice phenomenon. And so yeah, I've got some that I've recorded, not just me, but the team that I investigate with a lot, Medics for Paranormal out of Nashville. The first few that I'll play you are from Rosemont in Gallatin.
Okay.
And a little history behind Rosemont. I do a lot of stuff at Rosemont. I love that place. The history is fascinating. It was not ever a plantation. It was a thoroughbred horse farm. So they only grew enough crops and had enough cattle to feed themselves, basically, to sustain the family that lived there. It's actually 3 houses that are connected by a covered porch, by a portico. And it's more of like a New Orleans, Louisiana style house than you would ever see here in Tennessee. But the Guild family who built it, all the bricks came from on site from the clay, Tennessee clay. The walls are 3-foot thick brick. And yeah, it's just an amazing place. So they raised thoroughbred horses, and they were occupied by the Union during the Civil War. And actually, Josephus Kahn Guild, the father of the family who built the place, he was a judge. He actually was imprisoned as a political prisoner because he opposed the Civil War in general. And so, but their line of thoroughbred racehorses actually produced the grandfather of Secretariat, the famous racehorse. So they have a huge lineage of all these famous racehorses and producing these amazing racehorses. So I believe this is the first one. You're going to hear a little kid talk, and then you're going to hear my investigator friend Lee talk, and then you're going to hear something else. And I'll play it a couple of times.
I know little Willie did. That's for sure.
Did you hear that after the kid talk? I thought the investigator was going to talk, but it's just the kid.
Yeah, I did.
What'd you hear?
I mean, I heard a child's voice.
After that, there's something that comes
Okay,
out.
let's listen again.
I know little Willie did. That's for sure.
There's a horse whinny right at the end. There, you can hear a horse. It might be hard for you to hear because the way you're listening, but
Yeah.
But I'll play it one more time. After the kid gets done talking, right?
All
You'll
right.
hear like a click, like a knock or a click, and then you'll hear it.
I know little Willie did. That's for sure.
Did you hear that, Tom?
I didn't, but
Yeah. Anybody listening with headphones they'll hear it.
Yeah,
It's really loud.
we'll make sure we get headphones on and listen to that.
Yeah, and just to let everybody know, like these 3 EVPs that I'm going to play, the other 2 and the horse whinny there, this come from like probably 12 hours of audio. So multiple recorders, multiple cameras that we have to go through, and these, I believe, the horse whinny came from a actual voice recorder, and then the other 2 I think came from a camera. But so this is hours and hours that we're going through just to get these small pieces of evidence. So this next one, you'll hear the kid, and then you'll hear the investigator, and then you'll hear a woman's voice, and she's kind of mumbling. I can't make out what she's saying, but it sounds like she's answering their question.
I have my friend Lily here. She come to see you. She's a very big admirer of you. Can you tell her hello? She come a long way to see you. Say hi.
Hey.
Right at the very end, it's kind of a mumble, like,
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's no, that was nobody in the room. That wasn't anybody else in the room. And they didn't hear that at the time. That showed up on the recorder. And the next one is a similar, it sounds like the same woman to me. It sounds like a female voice. Sounds like the same woman. And this is from Rosemont as well.
I'm going to have Jacob sit back in the desk. Thank you. Thank you for that.
She kind of, after Lee says, thank you for that, you kind of hear like a whole sentence there.
I'm going to have Jacob sit back in the desk. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of faint. Then the EVPs they're hard to come by, especially really good ones. The first one, yeah, you need to go back and listen to this, and which I'm sure you will with your editing and stuff. But
Oh yeah.
The horse whinny is like really loud.
Okay, so see, like I edit the show at night. So what I may need to do for this episode is edit during the day because I'm like alone in my office, like late at night with my headphones on. So I'm going to try to edit in the morning on this one.
EVPs are insane. And to also, like I said, disembodied voices are crazy. To hear somebody talking when you know you're with the only people in the building and hear somebody talking in the other room, something like that. But yeah, EVPs, we're always excited when we catch EVPs or even hear disembodied voices. We're running to find out, what it is, where other people are like, I'll be scared. But no.
Thank you so much for coming on and for sharing all of this with me, because it's something that a lot of people don't think about or don't know much about. And so we've shed some light, at least on reasons why you should at least, look into some of these legends and these stories, if for nothing else, the history and the folklore.
Right. Yeah. And it's the paranormal is not just for October. Paranormal happens all the time. And so, it's not just Halloween is not just the only paranormal time of the year. For me, it's every day. This is what I do for a living. So, which is pretty awesome. But yeah, people go out and visit these historical locations and ask about the haunted stuff. It's those stories are maybe more fascinating than the history they're telling you.
Yeah, no, it's true. And this episode is airing in July. So, you can have hauntings in July. It doesn't have it doesn't have to be October.
I'm actually in July, I'm going to St. Augustine, and I've got some stuff planned down there. I'm going on vacation, but I've got some paranormal stuff that I'm doing down there too for the show. And so it'll be fun going to the famous haunted Augustine Lighthouse and the big Castillo de San Marcos, the big fort there in St. Augustine and some other places. Yeah.
All right.
So it'll be fun doing some investigating and some podcasting and that type of stuff.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, okay. So where can we find you? Where can we follow you and catch all of this stuff and just keep in touch with you?
So I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Most of the time you'll find me on Facebook. That's where I do most of my social media stuff. You can follow me at Eric Freeman Sims on my own page, or I have a Facebook group called the Unseen Paranormal Lounge, where we talk about different paranormal stuff. We talk about the show, talk about the podcast. I, talk about guests that are on there, and we have discussions. And then I also have the Unseen Paranormal Podcast actual page on Facebook that you can go and follow on there. And you can find the Unseen Paranormal Podcast pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts or music. So Spotify, Apple, Google Podcast, Amazon Music. My episodes go up on YouTube with just the audio. Podbean, which is my they're the ones that host my podcast. Pandora, iHeartRadio. Yeah. So in any other podcast player you've ever heard of. So I'm everywhere.
All right. You are haunting us.
Right.
With your podcast. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on. I hope to have you back sometime. We'll do part 2 and there's so much more we could talk about.
Well, and I have a book that will be out September, October, the Small Town Haunts and Legends of Tennessee. So
all right. Well, yeah, and where can people find that when it comes out?
It will be all over the place. It'll be on Amazon, Kindle, all those places that most people get books, and probably some physical locations too.
All right. So. Well, we'll keep an eye out for that. Have a great day. Go enjoy your resident ghost. And we didn't talk about that, but you've got a ghost at home. So maybe, go check in with him and make sure he's doing all right. And we will chat with you later.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarah. I really had a good time talking to you. Bye-bye.
Bye.